Throughout the literature on the settlement of Florida, from the contemporary sources of Spanish, French, and English attempts to colonize, through the American experiment in the 19th century, to the proto-histories of the Gilded Age, and even the more recent scholarship, a prevailing theme remains in which native peoples of the coast are described as fierce and resistant to the Spanish before dying off in the mid-18th century, leaving a depopulated peninsula. However, these narratives rely heavily on the biased and fragmented written record, as well as a fundamental misreading of the 1763 removal of Spanish colonists and mission Indians to indicate that all native peoples left for Cuba. A recent history by Alejandra de Bukovsky improves our knowledge of the era, highlighting that the Aís seem to burst into Spanish, French, Dutch, and English sources like lightning, brightly and rapidly illuminating the geopolitics of South Florida, and then just as quickly disappear into one of the many lacunae of the colonial archive. More detail about the lower Indian River Lagoon's indigenous history can be found by viewing the physical records of the region and consulting native oral histories and epistemologies. The physical record of the Indian River Lagoon tells a remarkably rich history. Vero's indigenous history brings into question many long-held stereotypes about native peoples and their settlements in North America. Physical evidence of human settlement in the Indian River Lagoon date back at least to the late Pleistocene era, as physical evidence from what came to be known as the Vero Man site indicates occupation some 13 to 14,000 years ago. By examining the remaining physical evidence, including Clovis and Folsom points that highlight the presence of hunters in the region, one can see continuous occupation of the marshlands of the lagoon. Eventually, these groups culminated into complex polities in the Mississippian era throughout Florida. The group that inhabited the region that became Vero were the Aís, a polity of several thousand people that controlled the lower Indian River Lagoon in a large territory that ranged from Cape Canaveral south to Jupiter. When the Spanish arrived in 1513, they named the territory Rio de Aís, or Indian River, after the group. The first European recorded history of the Aís came from that encounter, and as Robert Davidson notes in the only book-length history of the Aís, they have the dubious honor of being the first native tribe encountered by Europeans in what became Spanish Florida. The hostility they displayed to Ponce de Leon and his small band of explorers would be the standard policy of the tribe for the next 200 years in dealing with European trespassers.